Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, an Italy travel podcast. I'm Darcy Melton.
And I'm Nathaniel Malor.
And today we are going to be bringing y'all some travel tips that we regathered, that we thought of on our recent trip to Venice and Florence.
We will. That is what today will be about. I think every time we travel in a sort of self-contained small way, like small trips specifically, just because that's what most people do, like not large nomadic type traveling. There's always a few. Well, no, because
we're not hunter-gatherers.
Well, I meant more like for the year of 2018 or 2019, where like every couple months we were leaving and going.
I see.
We had to be on the move for visa reasons. It sounds like we were like escaping the government. It's just like we could only spend 3 months at a time in Italy or in Europe, so we were always bouncing around Europe to England or to Scotland to North Macedonia, back to Europe to this to that. So it was like a different set of travel tips that we were accruing, like how to long-term travel.
Mm-hmm.
But we realized like when we go these short trips to places, we always end up with the same like number of tips, especially within Italy. Like, so if you're listening to this and you don't at all want to go to Italy, then some of these are going to be weirdly specific about Italy. And I apologize for that ahead of time.
They're pretty good general travel rules though, as well.
They are, yes. A lot of them are. So if this is probably going to be good for anything in terms of just generally traveling. But yeah, these are things we've learned, again, relearned over and over again. And some of them will be super, I think, obvious on a certain level, but none of them will be, just in case you're only listening to the first minute of this, none of it's going to be like, use a travel credit card and, I don't know, always remember to XYZ. I don't know. It's always like the travel tips that you're just like, oh my gosh, yes, no, I know that. I meant more like the specifics of it. So these will try to be a little bit like potentially too specific for every situation, but I don't know, to help essentially.
Maybe.
Well, like some of the first one's going to be about Frecciarossa, the train. So it's like, if you're not taking Frecciarossa, this will be useless for you.
Right, but some of the others are general, like how to move around a city and communicate with the people you're traveling with and things like that.
Exactly. So, shall we just jump into it? We don't really have any news that's fun and exciting and interesting.
Well, there's been, I guess one travel tip is looking at the weather. I only say that especially because there has been a lot of flooding in Tuscany.
Oh my God, that's right. Yeah.
That has been quite intense. So, just look at the weather up until the point that you're traveling, so you know how to be prepared.
Yeah, definitely. That's a huge, I mean, like weirdly, a huge travel tip, but definitely look at the weather before you go anywhere. Not just also the weather. What is that? The outside weather, but the political weather. That was always the travel tip that people gave to me. It was like, always see if people are about to go on strike or about to this, or about to that. I did not. I often ended up in places that should not have been, I feel like. But in Italy, no, I meant like, I think I was always like, oh, they're about to strike. And I just Googled that, I would have known.
Mm-hmm.
And Italy, I think, is a good example that they will often go on strike here. And, but that's not really a super big issue in terms of like, even for transportation. I'm thinking for like the trains and stuff, they will still run certain trains, even if they're on strike. So It's more about extraneous sort of transportation methods.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I guess brings us to our first tip.
That was a great segue.
I thought so too. I was so proud of it when it came to me. It came to me like as I was finishing talking about trains. So the Frecciarossa, just very briefly aside, and a lot of these I want to say too are not just things that we learned, but also things that we were noticing about other people that seem to come up with some frequency. I think is a fair way to put it. Like when we were on the train, we're like, wow, this has not sunk in for some people. And the first one is that the Frecciarossa does in fact have assigned seats.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the Frecciarossa before. It is the fast train in Italy that is operated by Trenitalia, Italy's national train line. There's also the Italo, which is like a private fast train line.
Italo also has assigned seats.
Italo also has assigned seats, for sure. And so, no, this basically, we only say this because you can get fined for not sitting in your seat. You can also start a bit of a kerfuffle for not sitting in your seat. I also wanted to throw in that empty seats does not mean that somebody won't be sitting there. So sometimes if you're like, oh, well, my entire group can sit with me because these are all empty around me, you can still get fined for it because somebody might be coming on in the next station. Some stations like Rome has a Terni and Tiburtina. Naples has Napoli Centrale and Napoli Afragola. So it could be if somebody gets on in Centrale and then they don't or it could be you get on in Centrale and somebody else will get on Afragola. And basically, just because the seat's empty doesn't mean it won't have somebody sitting there.
During your journey,
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get fined by the conductor for sitting in a seat that is not yours. Don't put your feet up.
Yeah, I just learned that one recently. I put my feet up on the chair in front of me, and Nathaniel was like, Darcy, we can get fined for that.
And actually, the conductors will go through, especially when they're doing the tickets, and they'll sort of gently, and then not so gently, be like, feet down, and they'll tap your feet and like, feet down, please, thank you. So that's just, yeah, don't put your feet up. A big, I think it has a lot to do with basically putting dirty feet and dirty shoes on a place where people sit.
Totally makes sense.
Get in where the screen says to get in the train, which makes no sense until you get to a station. But in a train station, in a lot of train stations, along the kind of roof of the tracks, for lack of a better word, like, where like the roof of the waiting area, the ceiling of the waiting area.
The roof of the walkway, the covered walkway will have screens on, the poles telling you where. Sometimes they're wrong, but
Sometimes
ideally telling you where each carriage will be. So if you need to get to carriage 10, you look on the screens to find where carriage 10 is.
Exactly. Thank you. And that will help save time, because that brings me to our next point, which is just simply that the trains will never really leave early. I don't think we've ever experienced trains leaving early. I don't think anyone in Italy has experienced that. They are quite strict on the trains having to leave at the time assigned or even later, but never earlier. I say this because some people who have traveled in Britain have expressed their annoyance to me at the fact that some trains in England will leave early.
That's wild to me. That
Insane.
Should not be allowed.
So that will not happen in Italy, and this is more especially important if you are at a larger train station, especially if you're traveling with a group of people, like your family, friends, whatever it is, maybe more than just your partner or just yourself. You might only get a minute or two warning, sometimes 3-minute warning, of which track your train will arrive on. We've had it before where the train's supposed to leave at like 1:20 and it's 1:18 and there's still no track number lit up. And there's not really there's no guideline really as to where to go. There's not like, oh, the Frettorosos are always going to be in these 5 tracks or in these 2 tracks or whatever. So you have to wait obviously until your track is assigned, and then you have to move there with some haste, because when your train's at 1:20, that's the time it leaves. So even if it's like, again, 1:18 or 1:19, it might still try to leave at 1:20. Not necessarily. I think that legally they have to spend X amount of minutes in every station, just in terms of to make sure people get on, but don't count on it. Like sometimes I think it's only like 4 minutes per station they have to legally wait. So if they get in at 1:16 into Rome, they will leave at 1:20 and you have to run there.
And speaking of Rome, there's one or two, what are they called? Banks where the trains come in.
Tracks.
Thank you. There are 1 or 2 tracks that are so far away from the rest of them.
1B and 2B.
It's very annoying. So if you are traveling, be prepared for having to go very far to those tracks. And if you're traveling with someone else, if you're traveling with a partner or a group, send someone who can go quickly to the train and tell, because they'll have conductors and people who work on the train standing outside the doors, tell them that
the rest of your party
party is coming. Yes. So just send the fast person ahead, because if you can't all run there.
Well, and that's actually, just on that note, very briefly, the 2 or 3 things to keep in mind there is it is, I think, 600 or 700 meters away from the rest of the tracks. So for the Americans, that is about 5 or 6 football fields. And
it's that far?
Yeah. I think so. They have a little sign that says 500 meters, 600 meters.
No wonder. I'm like, it's miles away. It's not, but it feels very, very, very far.
I think it says 500 meters. Like when you start at it, it says something like that.
Wow.
And then, I think it's only for regional trains. And we've only experienced it going to Perugia or Siena. Okay. So it seems like if you're not, so the Frettorosa won't go there. But if you're going to if instead of going to Florence from Rome, if you're going to go to Siena instead, you might have your train on that track. It's just really annoying when it's, again, using that 1:20 leave time as an example. Your train's supposed to leave at 1:20. You go there to wait. Then you find that your train instead has changed its track to a different track. You have to now walk that 500 meters back to where you started to get to the other track. And it can be, we did it with your mom, and it was we have to move with haste in order to catch it. And we did, but it was sweating and
it was a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's it for trains. The only other thing was simply that with some trains, mostly the Frettorosa trains, if you're running late, you can, in theory, just get onto any carriage and walk to your seat in whichever carriage you're in. They're all assigned, both inside the train and outside the train. You can easily see which carriage you're going to be in. However, some trains, especially Frettorosa trains, will be engine to engine, nose to nose.
It's like they attach 2 trains together.
Exactly. So and they'll tell you on the tickets, especially when you buy them, this seems to be done ahead of time. It's you won't be able to walk between carriage 4 and carriage 5. So get on where it says to get on. And again, if you have a valid ticket, you won't necessarily be fined, but you are fined for sitting in the wrong seat. So it's a little bit of it's just, you don't want to catch a conductor on their bad day, I think is
Right. I don't think I think like you said, if that happens to you and the train starts going before you realize that's happened, I don't think you'll be fined, but obviously you'll have to get off at the next station and go to your assigned
seat.
Yeah.
And then changing gears entirely. I was trying to make it a train thing. I can't really make it a train thing. Changing wheels. I don't know. Changing tracks entirely. Brilliant. Beautiful. So proud of myself. Bring a minimum of 2 pairs of shoes.
Yes.
This is not something that Nathaniel adheres to religiously, even though he should. And this comes from countless trips. This recent one was only an example of bringing 1 pair of boots that left me with large bruises all around my heels.
Horrible bruising on your feet.
So I can't recommend bringing 1 pair of shoes. And again, this is kind of, this is sort of, this would make sense to everybody. But I guess I'm just thinking, like, as when we're in the States, we drive a lot. We walk sometimes, but not like a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think as we've mentioned, just in this trip, we walked about a minimum of 10 miles a day, just going from place to place, checking things out. Not like, there's no like, it wasn't like in Rome. Sometimes it's much easier to go over 10 miles a day if you're really walking and really trying to get from site to site and not taking transportation. So you have to kind of be comfortable with a pair of shoes that aren't going to leave blisters and bruising, which brings me to that point of bring 2 pairs of shoes that hit or fit differently on your feet, if that makes sense. It's like I have a pair of Birkenstocks that kind of hit the back of my foot, but it's always nice to bring a pair of flip-flops with them because they hit differently. So
right, so you're not going to be creating blisters in the same spot.
Exactly. Thank you.
I brought a pair of vintage Doc Marten boots. I'm not trying to flex. They just are incredible shoes for walking and traveling and forever, and I love them. So I brought those because we were in winter. They're my warmest shoes, and they also work for when it's a bit raining. They're not rain boots, but a bit of rain is fine for them. And I also brought a pair of little tennis shoes so that I could swap on and off.
And part of it too is like heat, because we were this recent trip, we went to Venice and then we went to Florence just to explore, but it was I think it was a 15-degree difference between the two, maybe closer to 20. It was like 40s, mid 40s in Venice, and then it was low 60s in Florence. And for those of you who don't use Fahrenheit, I'm assuming it was chilly in one of those places and not as chilly in the other. I really should learn
Neither
Celsius.
of us can do Celsius yet.
I know,
I can do the
it's
metric
ridiculous.
system with measuring. I cannot do
at least the conversion. And then someone's like, it's 17 outside. I'm like, oh, wow, that's either cold or hot. Boy, can't wait. Yeah, so on that note, the 2 is also no new shoes. I think we've mentioned this 1,000 times, but it is so natural to be like, I'm going to go on a trip. I'm going to buy a pair of new shoes for this trip. Like whether it's new sneakers or new boots or new sandals or new flip-flops or whatever it is, I recommend breaking them in or wearing them very frequently.
Absolutely.
At your home before, I guess, basically wearing them abroad. Because the last thing you want to do is find out that your brand new boots that you just spent money on are incredibly painful to wear around for long periods of time.
Absolutely.
And then sort of last but not least on that was just simply wet and dry. Consider the fact that you will probably have some days that will rain. Even if you come in the summer, there are summer rainstorms. If you come in the winter, it's going to be more wet than dry. And if you come in the spring and the fall less wet, more dry, spring more wet, less dry. But it's always one of those things where if you look at these travel subreddits, especially for Italy, I don't know why we'd look at a different one. Let's be honest, it's just Italy. But a lot of people say, like, bring a jacket, bring a rain jacket. And there's a lot of people respond like, what kind of rain jacket? Like, I don't understand. Is it torrential downpours in Italy? Like, I don't get what I should be, what am I getting myself into? And it's not so much that, it's just, I think that even in Rome, like when it rains, it really rains. Mm-hmm. And then it'll be nothing. So it's just, if you're bringing a pair of sneakers and it's your only pair, you have to be prepared for the eventuality that they'll get soaked and they won't dry out and you'll have a pair of damp sneakers. So again, always bring 2 pairs, ideally one that can get wet. If it's in the summer, I always recommend a pair of not even waterproof sandals, but just like...
I always bring my Tevas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think Tevas are perfect. Flip-flops, something like that, anything that can get wet is fine. And then a pair of dry shoes. And in the winter, you were mentioning boots. If you have waterproof boots, that's great. And then a pair of sneakers that doesn't matter one way or the other. You mentioned the Acqua Alta season in Venice.
Yeah, so there are times in Venice there are going to be articles on our website to learn about the flooding in Venice, the Acqua Alta, but there are times when particularly Piazza San Marco and sometimes around the Ponte Rialto that it will flood and your feet will definitely get wet. I If you're coming in November or December, you might want to bring a pair of rain boots just if you're comfortable with that, but I know they're heavy. So you can also just plan to buy a pair in Venice if you need them, but that is definitely a time where you need two pairs of shoes because your feet will get soaked.
Yeah. And that's, again, it's a small thing, but it goes back to that comfort of the trip type thing. Moving past that, it's rest for 20 minutes. If you can't, basically, if you can put your feet up during that rest, it's better. And again, these are like silly, not silly, but they seem like really minor things.
They seem mundane almost,
Yes.
but they can be game changers.
And I think that's the thing that we learned. It's like that first day, especially in Venice, we just sprinted around Venice. And we ended the day exhausted and kind of in pain and just like, wow, I am wiped. Everything hurts. And then from then we're like, all right, let's just do every day, whether it's at the hotel or whether it's on a bench or on somewhere like that you could just put your feet up, not necessarily and lay down, just like literally just put your feet up. Mm-hmm. It really did change the mood quite a bit because it was just 20 minutes of just like, oh, wow, everything sort of settled. Especially in the summer, it's a lot easier if you're not in Venice, but places with parks. I'm thinking, Florence and Rome and Torino and also like, I guess even Siena has a giant sort of park area. You can easily just lay in the grass, put your feet up. It is a game changer. It makes the trip so much more relaxed, especially
taking the weight off your feet for a short amount of time makes your whole body feel so much better. I know that sounds so silly and so simple, but it really changes a lot.
And I think it's one of those things that's like it pays dividends. Like we've seen, especially in Rome in the summer when we used to house sit, we'd go out all morning and then we'd come back and spend the afternoon working or, just getting out of the heat basically. But it was always interesting going out in the evening, especially in more touristy areas, because you saw people who clearly had been out all day and were on their very last breath kind of thing. And they were just, it was only like 8:00. So it's still half an hour till dinner time kind of thing. And it's just, they were exhausted. And it kind of shows it's just like, had you put up your feet for 20 minutes, then this could be going back to your hotel room, splashing water on your face, laying down for a minute, or it could just be, like I said, a bench or park, something like that. It really does change just the entire energy, I think, of the trip in terms of, or that day specifically.
Absolutely. And I feel like you and I were talking about this off mic. There are some cities which are much more compact. So it's going to be easier to find a hotel closer to the tourist attractions and where you will likely be walking around. Venice is a great example of that. You and I stayed right near Piazza San Marco. Piazza? I said that weird.
Ponte Rialto is actually...
Thank you. Ponte Rialto.
Not that they're that far away, but we were like...
I remember thinking we were a pretty close walk to the Piazza San Marco. But yes, I stayed near the Ponte Rialto. So it was really easy to walk back to the hotel room and put our feet up and regroup, splash water on our face, refresh. In Florence, it's a pretty compact city. It's fairly easy to do that as well. And in Siena, Rome, it's harder to. It's just a bigger, more spread out city. So just something to think
And that's
about.
the thing. And that goes back to, we've talked about this a lot, I think. It feels like we've talked about it a lot, but it's do you stay in the city of the, like in the city center basically and spend a little bit more, or do you stay on the outskirts of the city, spend a little less, but it's not as easy to reach that hotel or whatever, bed and breakfast, whatever it is, if you need it. So, there's this trade-offs, I think, on both sides in terms of, and you and I found that even though we usually stay on the outskirts, partly because we do a lot of house sitting, partly because it's cheaper on the outskirts, it was really nice to stay on the inside. And something you mentioned off mic too about the rest is, especially if you're traveling, like if you are a little older, or if you're traveling with somebody older, if you're traveling with parents, it can be a nice time to kind of like, my father, for instance, likes resting. He has a little, has his like, I like to check the news, I like to do this, I like to do that. He likes to do that when he's traveling, which boggles my mind. So he always likes to, like, that was a good 3 hours of walking around Venice. Let's call it there for now. Let's go back to the hotel. I'm going to put my feet up and look at some news. And I'm like, we're in Venice, just to be clear. This is Venice, the Venice. I think we can check news when you get home from your trip. But he does like the sort of pattern that he has. And it does also help too, as you mentioned off mic, to kind of group on the day, like check in, especially, and a lot of these too, I want to say, like, they're not just, this could be a check-in on the day if you're in a group, how do people feel? Are you hungry? Are you this? What do we want to go see next? Et cetera, et cetera. But as a solo traveler, as somebody who's traveled solo for a bit, taking a pause was really helpful for myself, and especially because there was, I don't know, when you have somebody else, you can always ask what that person wants to do. But when it's just you, it can be either I have a really like, I want to go do this thing, or I have no idea what I'm doing here. I don't know what I'm doing. And, having that little rest can be a nice way of just being like, okay, what do I want to see? What do I want to do? Do I want to like do some research and figure out what's here? I just sort of
I think if
end it
you're
out.
traveling alone, it's a regrouping with yourself and having a bit of a mental break, because no matter if you're traveling alone or with a group, it can be very overwhelming and it's like a lot of work for your brain to be constantly making decisions all day about where to go and how to get places and what everybody wants to do and when you're hungry and what sights you want to see. It's a
Exactly.
lot.
Yeah.
So if you're traveling with a group, a partner, family, if you're traveling with older parents, anything like that, it's a really good time to take a break and to talk about what the plan is for the rest of the day by going back to the hotel or even going to a quiet park, like you said before, to
Yeah.
take a little
Yeah.
rest, rather than being in the center, in the hubbub and, sort of frantically trying to figure out what the next plan is.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think that's a big I don't know, it's a big benefit to a trip, to any trip basically, whether you're traveling by yourself or with a group. Not quite related to that at all, in the sense that there really is no segue. You mentioned that earlier, like how do these go together? They don't.
Okay.
But there's a loose group here. When speaking English is our next little topic, and we are going to do an episode at some point about sort of, I guess, speaking English, speaking Italian. For those of you who might want a couple words of Italian before you go, or at least understand like potentially some brief things, whether it's if you're a vegetarian or or you are celiac, or you have some sort of thing that you need to communicate in terms of allergy or in terms of needs. We were going to do a little episode, I think, on that. But potentially more important is how you speak English when you're in Italy. And it's, again, this kind of comes from, I think anyone listening who speaks multiple languages, especially if you had to learn the second language later in life, it can be really hard to learn that language when people are speaking quickly, with slang, with colloquialisms, smashing words together, all sorts of things. And I think when somebody's like, oh, if young people in Italy, they'll speak English. And yes, technically true. But like growing up in the States, we had to take Spanish. And I think we took Spanish class for like 12 years. I know like 7 words
I
of
don't
Spanish.
speak any Spanish.
Yeah.
It's bad. Yeah.
But I think that's the thing. It's like people here do speak English technically, and some people speak really good English, and some people are like, I have 4 words of English. I'm never going to use it.
And I feel like even people who speak very good, I don't want to say intellectual English, but the kind of English that you learn, academic English, thank you, especially in the North, tons of people in forward-facing hospitality jobs speak English, and they speak English very, very well and understand it very, very well. But if an American talks with or an English person or an Australian person, if you talk with a thick accent, that is not the English that they are used to. If you talk really quickly and smash your words together, that sounds like one word rather than 5.
Exactly. Yeah.
So for example, like the hi, how you doing?
Yeah.
That sounds like one word.
Yeah.
So don't
Hi, how
say
you
that. Don't say, hi, how you doing? Can I get a coffee?
Yeah.
No. Say, hello. Good morning. Can I have a coffee?
And I think that's actually, I even had to just change that sentence too. And we can do a whole episode on this. I realize but it's the difference between get and have. Like, can I have a coffee? It's different than can I get a coffee, or can I grab a coffee, or, could you get me a, or what do you think, whatever sort of like, part of it I think is Italians are known to both be incredibly indirect as people and also somehow incredibly direct as people. And you can tell that, I think, by when I say indirect, I do mean like a lot of emotional things. A lot of Italians tend to be indirect for whatever reason. It's like
Yes.
they talk around an issue rather than about the issue.
They're like Southern Americans.
They're like Southern Americans. But when they're direct, it's like at a coffee shop or a grocery store or something. There's no, hey, how you doing? How you been? Good. All right. Well, yeah, I'm just no small talk. It's just hi, coffee. Thank you.
Or good morning. I think good morning is nice.
No, for sure. Good morning. So I was thinking like even like here or even like a lot of times to just go up to the barista and be like, "Due caffè per favore,"
That's
and then
true.
that's it. There's
Yes.
no hello. There's no how you doing. It's just two coffees.
I feel like though it's good practice as a tourist to be as
Yes.
nice as possible to start with good morning, just so
sure.
you're like hey, I see you as a human.
Yeah, and I think and something we're going to talk about, or as we continue this, I guess these episodes, we're going to be talking about the South more because it's not something that's been covered very frequently. And when we say the South, we kind of mean Calabria, we mean Basilicata, we mean Campania, Puglia a little bit, not really, because a lot of people do know about Puglia. And a lot of that is to say English is not as wide spoken in the South as it is the North. In the North, you can pretty much run the risk that somebody will speak English. In the South, it's a lot less common, especially outside of like the Amalfi Coast or Naples, Salerno, any big city. Like if you go to Matera, for example, you might not, the people, they might not speak as much English as you're hoping for. So it's important to speak slowly, enunciate very clearly, not use the colloquialisms, don't smash your words together, don't use slang, and kind of when in doubt, skip pleasantries, like in terms of the, good morning I think is fine, but it's the, how you doing? How you been? What's up?
I heard so many people, I think it's a very American way of being distant but nice, of like, hi, can I just get this
Yeah.
thing? And that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Hi, can I just get a coffee?
Yeah.
Don't say
it's
that.
like, what? I don't
That's
know
so
that
many
word.
words for someone to have to think about in a second or third language.
Yeah. And especially when you say one coffee, they're like, I know the words for one coffee.
Right.
Let's do it. It's perfect. One coffee. I got it. I'll make a coffee. And no, so I think that all makes sense. We've kind of talked, we'll talk about, I think we'll bring it up a little bit later, but just slightly in that note, we have an article on coffee drinks. We have an episode on coffee drinks, depending if you want to listen to it or read it. But just on a small level, it's trying to I realized we were listening, overheard a number of people trying to explain the coffee drinks they wanted, especially at very traditional coffee shops that were like, so that's not on the menu.
Right.
What do you want that's on the menu? And that is just something to keep in mind, in terms of like, just choose something. If it says something coffee and you need a coffee, just choose it. And if it's not what you like, it's fine. Well,
Like you guys all probably know this, but frappuccinos don't exist. The American latte is not the Italian latte. So just have an idea of, don't expect to get the coffee that you get at home, I guess.
And don't expect coffees to go. That's not really a thing at all. I don't think it's a thing anywhere really. I mean, in Italy, I don't know if anyone will offer you a coffee to go. It's more like,
We have seen people walking around with coffees in Venice and Florence, and I guess they'll do it for you at some places, but that's not
I was
Italian.
saying Florence for sure, because there's a lot of American students. That would make kind of sense to be like, okay, they're catering to American needs. But I was thinking, and I guess Venice too some, but I was thinking more in terms of, actually, no, you're right, in Venice as well. It's like sometimes people would show up at like a wine bar with a coffee, like they got a coffee earlier, and I was like, oh, that's
One version of an Italian coffee that is a real Italian thing is that like people who work in nearby businesses can order little coffees to their business, and so the one of the baristas or people who work at the coffee shop will walk over with a little tray of coffees to go to the little business, which is adorable.
And it's really cute. And then so going through another 5 tips real quick that are not that as in depth, and then we'll end on our somewhat big ones, but rendezvous point. That is something that's really only important if you're traveling with a partner or if you're traveling with a group of people who are self-sufficient in terms of like not children. Rendezvous point for kids also makes sense, especially if they're of a certain age. I feel like if they're like 8, you might want to
Definitely. If you get separated, come find us here.
Yeah. But I think a rendezvous point always helps. Even between you and I, we have a rendezvous point usually. And almost always I guess like the big tip is don't choose your hotel as a rendezvous point because it can be really difficult to find your hotel again. Partly because there's a lot of hotels that go by the same name in the same city. So you might get the wrong one. Part of it is because if you ask, like if you don't have a phone, for instance, your phone's dead or something like that, and you ask somebody, hey, can you tell me where hotel so-and-so is? There's a very small chance they'll know where that is.
But they will know where the Piazza San Marco is, or the Ponte Rialto, or
The Colosseum.
Colosseum, exactly. So a good rendezvous point for us is if we are going to see this site and we get split up, keep headed toward that place and we will find each other there. If we're going to the Colosseum and we got split up on the subway, we're both still going to head to the Colosseum and then we'll find each other there.
Yeah, and this happens too, especially, so like it kind of goes the trust your adult, quote quote unquote travel partner, but it's not uncommon, especially like in the summer where things are slammed for you. Like if you're getting on a bus in Rome, it's happened with you and I where there's like 40 people trying to get on this bus, and it's like, okay, you try to get on, I'll try to get on, we'll just both try to get on. But it can make it worse when it's like when you're by yourself. I think it's easier to get on any sort of form of transportation. When you're with somebody else, it's easier for other people to kind of cut in front of you and wiggle through, but it's by yourself.
People cut in front of me all the time. I think I'm invisible sometimes.
I think they see me and they're like, well, I can get in front of her. I don't know if I can get in front of him. Though it is, I mean, yeah, it's a little bit of a, I don't know. It just seems, but it's like also when you're by yourself, it's easier, I think, for you to kind of zigzag to the front of a line.
Duck and weave.
With me, I look like I'm going to hurt somebody on accident. So I should not do that. But no, it's, and as you mentioned in, when we were just in Venice, you were just like, there's that anxiety that there's because of a crowd of people in between you and the exit, and you can't constantly.
Yeah. So the specific example is there's a ferry in Venice that you can take across not the Rio Grande. What is it called?
It could be the Rio Grande, but I think it's the Grand Canal.
Thank you. And so I know now, because Nathaniel and I have been traveling so long together, that if we both know where we're going, I can trust him to get off or on the transportation that we need to get on. We do try to stay in contact with each other, but for this specific example, we were on the ferry. It was packed. We both looked at each other, made sure this is where we're going to get off, right? And I booked it as quickly and as politely as I could through the crowd to get off. And I just had to trust that Nathaniel was also going to get off. But it was important for me to get my tiny self off of the boat without, getting stuck, essentially. And I think if I were with my mom, just because she's she has less experience with travel in Italy, I would have put her in front of me and said, Mom, just get off the boat.
Just push.
You can trust me. I'm going to be able to get off. You just need, it's not even like putting the most vulnerable person maybe it is. It's putting the most vulnerable person first. I feel more vulnerable in large crowds because I am smaller than you. So
and you
I know
easily get lost.
Yes, I can get easily lost because I'm short and Nathaniel can't find me. So I have to push through and know that Nathaniel's going to get off behind me. If I were with my mom, I'd say, Mom, push through. Trust that I'm going to get off behind you. It's going to be fine.
And I think that's the thing, and especially with any sort of travel partner relationship, whether it's parents or whether it's spouses or whether it's your date, whatever it is, you're dating your brother, siblings, whatever. It's just, you have to kind of trust that person. And if they miss the stop, that's fine. It's not the end of the world by any means. It happens all the time.
They can manage and they'll get off at the next stop. You'll
exactly
find each other at the rendezvous point.
You can always get off the next stop, get on the whatever transportation is going the other way, get back. And then again, having that rendezvous point helps, especially if you don't have cell phone signal that works in Italy, or if the phones are dead, or you only have one phone. That's something Darcy and I do often, is just go out with one phone. I mean, on the wild chance that we're pickpocketed, we only lose one phone, not two, kind of thing. In kind of a related sense, it's set a direction is something that we found helpful. Again, this is a much smaller, much more mundane, not necessarily one size fits all sort of tip. And like I said, a lot of these are not necessarily going to be one size fits all. But you and I think, have found, while just wandering around and exploring a neighborhood is a ton of fun, we have often ended up in places that are either like super residential, and you don't realize you're just like, oh, this is a straight up neighborhood. There's no food around.
We wandered into the suburbs.
Yeah, exactly. and sometimes that means, I think once in Rome, we went to a place just like, oh, we'll just bounce around, that we were on the last bus. Like, we got off the bus, and that was the last bus for like 5 or 6 hours before the next bus would pick up. So we ended up walking for a while. Sometimes we went to a neighborhood, we were looking for gelato. We found this great gelato shop, or we'd heard of this great gelato shop, so we wanted to go try it. And they're like, oh, we'll just maybe get like lunch around there. And we found out that's the only food in that area is this gelato shop. There's nothing else open.
It's a neighborhood with a gelato shop.
Yeah, so it's something to keep, like something we've started doing is like, okay, we're going to pick a point, whether it's a restaurant, a coffee shop / cafe, or a site or something like that. And sometimes I think food helps, because it's just pick a direction, go, and then if you find some food on the way instead, great. If you find somewhere else you want to be instead, awesome. But that the end of it you can eat, which I think helps a lot. Transportation, we talk about this every single time, but it's one of those things that bears repeating. Validate your ticket. I think there is every single form of transportation practically in cities in Italy. You have to validate your ticket when getting on board, whether it's Venice, Florence, Rome, Siena, etc., etc. This also happens for regional trains. You have to validate your ticket. It happens for buses. You often have to validate a ticket if you're not buying it on board. Validate your ticket. If you don't, you can get caught, fined, and it's just not worth it, especially in a place like Venice where they are hefty fines for not having one or not validating your ticket.
And validating your ticket means basically putting it in the little electronic stamp machine.
Yes.
That are, for trains, they are typically on the platform that you stand on, little yellow boxes usually. For Venice, you have to validate the ferry ticket, which I think is also a little yellow box just outside of the ferry stop.
On the buses in Rome, it's on board.
Yes.
Subways, it's not on board. You have to pass it through the little machine, but that's much easier to validate your ticket for a subway in Rome. But like for Florence, Siena, and Rome, I think it's all validate on board. And a big thing is, like, especially with Venice, that's a big one. It's oftentimes, especially in a smaller station where there isn't, because there are, like, for instance, the train station stop for the Vaporetto, you can't go through the barrier without validating your ticket.
Right.
But in some of the other much smaller stops, you absolutely can. There's no barrier there. You have to validate on board. And the basically the ticket controllers do not care that you did not know that. They're like, there are signs everywhere. You should have been reading the signs. You should have read your ticket. It says validate before boarding. This is on you, not us. Here's your 200 euro fine or whatever it is. It can ruin a holiday. On that note, stay up to date with pricing.
Absolutely, yeah. So this one is a pain in the butt, I'll be honest.
Yes.
But it is quite important, especially if you're someone traveling on a budget, which I think almost everybody has a budget when they travel. And so I learned just before we went to Venice, I thought the Vaporetto was going to be maybe €3 to take, just because that's kind of a general price for taking public transportation. It is in fact $9.50 for one trip.
That was surprising.
Which, if I'm doing quick math correctly, is about 3 times the cost of what I thought it would be. So it's a good idea to stay up to date with transportation costs. Obviously, you're going to know what your hotel costs. Look up restaurants before you go to plan out how much you're going to be spending at restaurants. I'm going to have a tip about that in just a second. And yeah, okay, so restaurants, transportation, hotel, museums, just have an idea of what you're going to be spending so that you can plan for that.
And sometimes things are out of date, even on the Only a Bag website, unfortunately. I know that we sometimes have some things that are out of date in terms of pricing because, I mean, things just change quickly sometimes. It's unfortunate. It's not like think like transportation. I think Rome just raised their prices. I think we still have 150. We have to change it. They just raised prices. And unfortunately, that's the thing. Things do not quickly change prices. It's not like, oh, it's surge pricing because their tourists are here. It's just sometimes these things happen and it's hard to keep track with all of them. But it's always nice that you have to kind of just budget the extra 20% for, well, the restaurants, as you were just about to say, was the Google Map tip.
Yes. Okay. So Google Map tips. So Nathaniel and I always look up restaurants before we go to places because we're on a budget and because we are vegetarian. So we do pretty intense restaurant lookups before we go to a new city. And we like to look at the menu. And often that means that you go to where the photos are in Google Maps and look, you can click menu now, but sometimes it'll just be in the photos. And look at the menu. Somewhat confusingly, they don't always put the most recent photos first, but in the corner of every photo on Google Maps, you can see when that photo was taken. So go through and find the most recent that you can to get the most recent pricing.
And even on that note, though, even sometimes if it's recent, like we went to a wine bar that was, I think the photo was only a month old, and all the prices were like €3 to €4 for a glass of wine, and we get there and it's all €7 to €8 for a glass of wine. And it could just be, they changed the wine they have. It's now 7 to 8, but it was also just a bit of a, that is double the price we thought we would spend here. And then even the little rest of the food, I think we got like an artichoke heart, and it was supposed to be 4 on the menu that we saw online, and it ended up being 7. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's just things have changed in the last month, which is totally fine. Obviously, prices are always increasing, unfortunately. I don't think we've ever gone anywhere and be like, wow, this is cheaper than it said online. Yeah. But it does change things because and sometimes you don't know until you get there. It's just, again, these things kind of happen, and it can easily balloon your budget. If you have a $2,000, $3,000 budget for your trip, it can easily end up being 3,600 euros or dollars instead, because it just, everything's a little bit more expensive. And then by the end of the trip, you're like, that was a couple €100 more expensive.
Absolutely.
And the last small note was on bring your own minor first aid.
Yeah. So I recently needed, my lips got so chapped weirdly, and my face was all dry when we went to Venice. It was crazy.
Super
So,
cold and windy, I think. I mean, which was, I think you were like
yeah.
basically really, really reeling from the wind burn.
Yeah, I get windburned so easily. And so I needed to pop into a pharmacy just to grab some Vaseline. And it was, okay, just to explain to y'all, I asked for a little, I wanted like a little, Carmex size, if you know what Carmex is. It's just a little personal lips balm kind of size. And it was like €7 for this tiny little thing. And I was like, that's out of my budget. I'm so sorry. And she says, let me go to the back. We have bigger tubes. So she gets me like a Neosporin size tube, and that was €4, which is better. But if you're coming from America, where I feel like you can get a tub of Vaseline
Yeah.
for like $2, it was more expensive than I expected. So my tip is to bring things like dextrose, Neosporin, or Vaseline, whatever you use, and ibuprofen or aspirin, and
Absolutely, because
eye
those are really
drops.
expensive at the pharmacy.
And so for any painkillers, like regular painkillers, ibuprofen, aspirin, stuff like that, Tylenol, all of those come in much smaller packages in Italy. They'll come like
It's like
4 or
10.
6 or
Oh,
10
yeah, okay,
at a
yeah.
time.
But for like still like €3 or €4 for those pills. Not
Exactly.
like it's for like that I need it for right now, not I need it for every
General,
time. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, stuff. So bring,
They also won't sell you like ibuprofen and acetaminophen and whatever it is together.
yeah, definitely not. No, they'll be like, you can't have these two things together, which is quite helpful because sometimes I forget the things you can't.
But it's also like, right, I wasn't going to take them together. I was going to take them separately. Like,
Right.
okay, but we can't sell them to you together at
Exactly,
all.
yeah, yeah.
So I guess come back at a different day to buy it, which is a little it's like, okay, well, can we make 2 separate purchases? And obviously they're like, no. So, which makes
It's
sense.
good. It's good health and safety, but
It's just a different experience because then I think in like, I don't know, a grocery store in America, you can walk out with a couple tubs of ibuprofen and Advil and aspirin and Bayer and this and that and the other thing, and nobody bats an eye. And here it's like they bought acetaminophen and ibuprofen. I don't know what they're planning on doing with that,
Right.
but they are not allowed to do that. So it's a lot of fun.
yeah. And what was the other one? So there's
Even small things like
eye drops.
eye drops. That was
Eye
a big
drops
one.
can be quite expensive here. So
Yeah, they really can
get
be.
some generic eye drops in the States.
That one we've talked about too. We have a little article on like plane tips, like long-term, like if you're taking a long haul flight, eye drops are really important on a flight. These, I mean, it's also, if you ever like really want to find like not even beauty tips, but like, I guess not even hygiene tips or beauty tips, but just like skin tips. I think a lot of flight attendants talk about it like in depth, how they maintain like healthy skin, but you are like 8 hours, 9 hours in a super dry, super low humidity tube with recycled air, and it's like everything hurts, your eyes, your nose,
Just
everything's
like
dried out.
gunk, dry. Ugh. Yeah.
So it's a I think I learned a lot like looking at all these flight attendants to see like what do you guys, what do you do? Is it Vaseline? Is it this? It's eye drops and it's wipes and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot out there. And again, these sound so small, but I think you and I have learned that we enjoy trips a lot more when you do sort of solve the small issues. I guess because the small ones tend to balloon into the big ones, if
Right.
that makes sense. And whether it's like the small blister that makes it kind of unbearable to walk after a couple of days because you're like, it's so painful, it burst, it's just raw skin, it's like bleeding, this is terrible. It's like, right. But had you got like a little moleskin for it or something like that, it wouldn't be an issue. Or
Moleskin.
yeah, there's those little things you can stick on your skin and it kind of prevents it from like rubbing. It's like a lot of hikers use them.
I don't hike. I've never heard of that.
I don't either, but I had some for safety. It's like not for safety, but it's like in my little first aid kit.
That's cool.
You're supposed to, I think you stick them to your foot, not to your shoe, but it's like where things rub a lot. You stick them to your foot so it rubs against that
prevents,
instead of your
like friction.
Exactly. Kind of a cool thing.
Oh.
Moving into the last 2 big ones, I think we would start with food. Yeah. And the biggest one with food that we found is we are both very gastronomic travelers. And
I thought you were going to say we're both gassy travelers.
I should hope not.
Sometimes it's true.
Sometimes it's true.
Human body.
Yeah,
So
a lot of gassiness.
gastronomics.
So we found not traveling on an empty stomach is super important. And when I say traveling, I mean whether it's in the train or the bus. It also is walking around a city. It's a weird thing, but we've found that there's a lot of anxiety that can come up when you're traveling on an empty stomach in terms of, and part of it is too, is we have a lot of this, especially now that we live in the South and we visit the North. where they do tend to eat dinner earlier. So we are not going to get hungry till 8:30, but then it's like, oh my God, things are closed at 8:30. We're trying to get a table. Everything's closing down. The kitchens are closing. We're not going to eat tonight. We're starving. Oh my gosh. And it turns into this whole problem that, obviously could have been avoided had we eaten an hour earlier. Not that we would do that. We would lose our citizenship to the south of Italy. But no, I think more importantly is there's a lot of anxiety around food for us, especially because just in Italy, especially in smaller places, things close between 1 and 4. So it's just, there's like this like thing that if you don't eat when you're supposed to eat, you're not going to eat. So if you try to eat a later lunch, you're out of luck. If you try to eat a later dinner, you're out of luck, or earlier dinner or whatever it is. So we've found that don't travel with an empty stomach, super helpful. Either always have something to eat, or always, like, if you're feeling a little hungry, go for that type of thing. You had a great tip of don't drink alcohol before getting on not a city bus, but like a kind of a longer term bus.
Yes. So alcohol is a diuretic. It is particularly effective with Darcy. I have to pee twice for every beer I have. Sorry if that's too much information. And so, yes, so my tip is if you're getting on a bus, buses often do not have bathrooms.
Yeah.
Trains do have bathrooms. You'll be totally fine. In fact, if you take the business class on Frecciarossa, you can get a free Prosecco with your ride. So anyways.
Or beer.
Or beer, yes.
Or wine.
Is there beer?
Yeah.
Oh, dang, I should get a beer next time. That's fun. So, yes, so I do suggest not to drink alcohol just before you're going to go on a long bus ride, because there likely will not be a bathroom for you to use on the bus, and it is a horrible situation to have to pee when you're on a long bus ride and you cannot.
And you can't get off.
Yes.
That's the other thing. Is like even sometimes they'll stop at a place and it's just to let somebody off or get somebody on. Even if there's like a bathroom there, they often will like, we have to like basically get back on the road. We can't wait for everybody to get off the bathroom or off the bus, use the bathroom. So yeah, we've been in that place where we're like, oh, we'll have a beer and then get on the bus. And we're like, well, this was a terrible decision.
Yes.
So that is a big one. But food is just, it's like one of those needs that just basically is, if you see the food in terms of like, if that's the need you have seen to and it's done, it's solved, the entire trip becomes better. We've always found. It's also, I know that like, it's so silly, but like, again, using my father and my brother as an example, when they came to visit, my dad's a big, I'll eat twice a day. I don't need 3 meals a day. I'm like, that's awesome for you. I also don't need 3 meals a day. But when I'm going to like Rome, I'm going to have like 6 meals a day because there's a lot of food I haven't tried and I'm going to try all of it. As much that can fit inside of me will fit inside of me. So, and
both are fine, but I think what's important is communicating about your needs.
Yeah. No, I even think both are great. I was thinking like also with my brother, he likes to eat, but then because we were with my dad, who's like, what, you're going to eat another meal? And I'm like, I am going to eat another meal. My brother was kind of folding to the pressure. And I was like, don't fold. No. It's pasta. You can have pasta. It doesn't count as a meal. You're fine. Because it was like, because you and I travel with we wake up, have a coffee, and we don't really eat in the mornings anyway, but then it's like, we'll have a gelato, we'll have something to snack on, a soupli, a this, a that, we'll get a sandwich for lunch, we'll get a piece of pizza for second lunch, we'll get another gelato to wash down the pizza and the sandwich, and then we'll get,
You and I can also split things too, so we can have like a little munch, and we'll split the tiny munch, and by the time we have been to 7 different munchy places, we've had a full dinner,
No, this is actually super helpful. And this kind of ties into the last big issue, and it's something we're going to do, I think, a bigger episode on. But for food specifically, to segue into this, is if you are traveling with a partner, if you're traveling with a family, I highly recommend you get clear on what food means to you all as a group. This is, I think, more important if you're traveling with friends, a spouse, a partner, sibling, something like that. Less so with kids, because with kids, it's kind of like, you know
when your kids eat,
exactly.
and what
it's
they
not
need.
a surprise to you.
Absolutely.
But if you're traveling with somebody for the first time, if you're traveling with a friend group, and you might be thinking like, food to me is, I'm going to have a little something, some sort of street food, a sandwich, I'm fine. And they might be thinking, we're going to be sitting down and eating a meal for everything. And one, that's just a difference of pricing, obviously. Somebody's spending €5 on a sandwich instead of 25 on a meal. 2, that's just a difference on expectations that the person who...
And time. It takes so much longer to sit down at a restaurant.
Absolutely.
Which can be great. So Nathaniel and I, because we've traveled together for so long and lived together for so long, we tend to be on the same page for eating, but we always still check in with each other. So there are some nights, especially in Venice, where we just ate cicchetti, which are those little munchy, half a slice of bread and a little something on top. And we walked around eating those and having a slice of pizza. And like I said before, by the time we'd had all that, we'd had a full meal. But that we were standing for a lot of that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And it was very disjointed. But that was fine with us. And that's, we talked about it. And that's also kind of how we eat sometimes. But there are also some nights where you do want to sit down for a plate of pasta. But especially if you're not used to living with that person that you're traveling with, if you're like with my mom, it was really important to communicate if we wanted to sit down for dinner, if we wanted to have a sandwich, how hungry are you when? Do you want to eat lunch before we go to the museum or after? The museum's going to take 3 hours to get through. Why don't we grab something quick beforehand? Things like that. It's really important to stay in communication about food because people can get hangry really quickly,
Yes,
and
yeah.
it is not a good situation.
And I think that's the biggest thing. It's going back to that sort of thing. If you see to food, I think you see to all your needs kind of thing. But and I know it sounds again so not silly, but it's like one of those things where I feel like I have personally learned it the hard way over and over again. I think you and I have together have learned it the hard way over and over again, both traveling together, but just with other people. It almost always comes back to food for us as a, either when something's not going right, in terms of, and it's like, it got worse because we're hungry, it's never gotten better because we're hungry. It's always made negative, like made an experience more negative rather than positive. And I think that some things too are simple miscommunications. I like, again, I'm using my father an example. I think I've already mentioned the story, but when he came to visit, I think we had one like 2 or 3 minutes before we had to get a train, maybe 5 minutes before we had to get a train. So we had time for a coffee. And in Italy, a time for a coffee is you stand at the bar, you sip your coffee, and you leave. And my father thought it was a sit-down event. So he like ordered a coffee. He went to go sit down. He was there, and I was like panicking.
In my mind, he was reading a newspaper.
Yeah,
I don't know if that happened in real life.
Just chilling. And then I think you had to go get them because they're like, "Where are you guys?" And they're like, "Well, we haven't gotten the coffees yet." I'm like, and you were just like, "Why are you sitting down?"
I did. I freaked out a little bit.
You were like, "Guys, the train's leaving in 2
My inner school teacher came out, and I was like, "This is not happening. Do you need to use the bathroom? Go use the bathroom. Have your coffee. We need to get to the train station."
And I think this kind of goes back a little bit to that when you trust your adult travel partners. I'm like, they know we leave in 5 minutes. Like, guys, you know we leave in 5 minutes.
They would have missed the train.
They would have missed the train. No, I think genuinely they would have missed the train, and it would have been, like, okay, yeah, I'll call me. We'll figure out the next train. But like, I told you when the train was. I told you you had time for a coffee. That's my miscommunication for not telling you. I meant an Italian coffee, not a French laissez-faire coffee. So that I think those are, again, this is that we're all bringing to this point of, if you are traveling with anybody else, and even including yourself, I think it is really, really, really important to set expectations as soon as possible, ideally before the trip has even started. And
then constantly check in. One big one to kind of, I don't know, maybe decide on, figure out beforehand is what people's morning routines are.
Yes, huge.
So again, with your dad, he likes to have a relaxed morning, which is totally fair. You and I...
Relaxed is code for, again, checking 18 different news sites, grumbling under his breath, swearing silently, swearing not so silently, and then somewhat ranting about something in the news where my brother is going, "Oh my God, Dad, let's just go. We can go see Florence." He's like, "You guys go see Florence. I'll be out there in a few hours." And of course, my brother, sweet dear brother, is like, "I'll wait for you." And I'm like, "Haven, we're not waiting. We're going. We're going now. Andiamo."
So that is one version of traveling, very relaxed, slow morning. Other people, especially on Instagram, I see these people who are like, "Why isn't Italy open at 6 a.m.?" I'm giving a weird accent. It's an okay question to ask. But there are people who travel and they want to be up and doing things at 6 a.m.
First in line, yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
You and I are kind of in the middle. We tend to get up around 8:39 when we're touristing.
Yeah.
And then we'll go, we usually don't have breakfast at home. We'll have a coffee. But when we're traveling, we usually go for like a little pastry.
We're not
and
crazy
a coffee.
people. Yeah.
I know.
I don't want to miss an entire 3 breakfasts. There's first breakfast, second breakfast, and
that's the
brunch.
thing too. So another thing, hopefully this makes sense when I say it all together. Nathaniel and I, when we were in Venice, I cannot count the amount of frittelle we ate, which are basically little donuts. And we ate them throughout the day, and we had several in the morning. And when we had several in the morning, we probably went to 2 different pastry shops that were not close to each other. And that's a very weird way to travel.
Yeah.
That is something
Very
that if
fun.
we were traveling with, it was amazing. But if we were traveling with someone else, that is something very important to communicate with people.
Yes.
Like, breakfast this morning is going to 3 different pastry shops. That's a lot of walking, and that's a big commitment to sugar and coffee.
Yes.
So that's a really important thing to me communicate.
And I think that's how you and I enjoy traveling, because I realized, though, again, with my parents or with my dad, your mom, and my brother, and even my mom when we're traveling, or anybody else like that, it's because we've even traveled with Italian friends, and when they don't like have lunch, we're like, are you guys insane? Like, what's going on? Like, it's 1:30, I'm starving, and you guys are having like a sausage and a beer, and I'm like, that's not lunch. That's not lunch. We need to find
Especially
lunch.
because we don't eat sausage.
Yeah, well, so then there's just beer, and I'm like, that's far from lunch. But I meant like, it's just like, even like, oh, we'll get sandwiches. I'm like, cool. Still no. Like, normally I'd say yes, but especially in I think in like cities, you can get really good vegetarian sandwiches, and then in the not
In
cities,
the small town south, especially.
you're getting cheese on bread, and if you're super lucky, they'll throw like a grilled eggplant on it for you. So that's a big thing. But expectations, I think, extend to, and like I said, we will do an episode on this because it's possibly I don't know, I'm curious to know how often you and I have seen fights like on trains, on where, or just in public, anywhere while traveling, that have led to the end of a relationship, whether it's a romantic one, a platonic one, friendship,
That seems super easy to happen.
a break in a parent and child relationship, because I think it's when you were so far away from comforts, and even like in Italy, we're not like that different from the United States or in Australia or United Kingdom or anything like that, in terms of like, it's still fairly familiar in terms of, a lot of the practices. But I think when you're in a different place, and when you're in a different part of the world, and you're surrounded by language you don't understand, and you're surrounded by food you don't understand, and you're surrounded by all sorts of things that take getting used to, and then you think you have like, well, the one thing I can cling to is my schedule. And then you're with somebody who's like, well, it's thinking the exact same thing, and then you realize you have different schedules or different budgets or different, again, expectations, which can extend to, for some, like for you like going into every church you see, which is like, I think, good thing.
do.
No, and I think it's like, I mean, now and I enjoyed going to churches. I think at the beginning,
Because I liked the art, to be clear.
yes, yeah, you're a big art fan. You're like a big fan of art or something.
Yeah, I mean, praying is great, but I don't pray in churches, so I like to go look at the pretty pictures.
I like that. I only pray outside of churches. Me and John Muir, there's the famous thing, I'd rather be in nature thinking about God than in a church thinking about the mountains.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, right.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think he did a lot of like a nature writing, but point is, he didn't like church either. So I don't know. But, I think when you're in Italy, it's like you can't really get away from it. It's like, we talk about this a lot in terms of like, it's a great place to go in the summer to cool down. It's a great place just to wander. A lot of them have like, not necessarily crypts, but somewhat underground areas. Not all of them are free, but majority.
If you're into crypts and dead bodies, a lot of them do have dead bodies.
A lot of them have dead bodies. If you're into dead bodies, and they're got crypts where it's nice and cool down there, so it can be a place to like kind of cool down. And no, but I'm thinking like that's something you really enjoyed. And at the beginning, I was always a little bit like, oh, another church. Oh, another, we can go. There are other things we can try. And now, of course, I do quite enjoy it. But I think that's an expectation, or lines like when the Pantheon usually has a really long line. The Duomo in Florence has a really long line. All of Florence has long lines, or any of these places that are obviously major sites. It's good to kind of to talk about expectations, because one person in your group might not be that. I don't need to see the inside of the Colosseum. I don't need to see the Uffizi. I'm not a big art person. Which is a great
thing to communicate about, because you can go separate ways. You can have an afternoon apart going to 2 different things instead of forcing each other to do something that you don't want to do. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the biggest thing. And we'll talk, again, this is why I want to get into it, because that is, a lot of it has to do with expectations. It has to do with this fear of traveling separately. Like, I think you and I, we did that with a little bit with your mom. It was like, yeah, we'll go around with you. But then it was sort of like, okay, well, you want to go see this thing. You like your mom wanted to go see one thing. You and I didn't really want to see it. We wanted to go do something else, but it was like, it was kind of like, it's a bit of a walk. It wasn't really like, let's just take it separately. We don't have to be together. And I think your mom wasn't like super thrilled about that. She thought we'd be doing everything together, which made perfect sense, because it was like, of course I thought we'd be doing everything together. I think conversely though, my dad thought we'd be doing more things separately, and it was sort of like, not that he wanted to go explore by himself.
That's the thing. That's something to talk about before the trip, and have at least maybe things will change, but at least where the other person is coming from.
Exactly.
And I think too, with all of our parents that we've traveled with, it's important to know that it is okay to take time away from each other, because you are essentially living together in a very tense, stressful, high-paced situation for days on end, and that is wild. that
Yeah,
is taxing on
absolutely.
everybody. It's taxing on romantic couples too. I mean, like, it's okay to take time away from each other. It's okay if you guys get in a tiff. You know, like, it is a stressful situation. So just be easy on yourself and know that it's okay to take time apart from each other, you
Yeah,
know?
because I think you and I travel really well together now, and I think at the beginning we had some fun tiffs in which we were like, we're gonna go and take some time separately, and it's just, but it makes sense because
I
it,
think we were both headed back to the hotel one time. We just walked on opposite sides of the road.
yes, because we were like, we need some space, and no, but I think there's a whole thing around just that, like, it's not like a sign of failure. It's not a sign of
Right.
like doing something wrong. It's really, I think it's really important to not try to force something to happen, like when you're with a partner, like in terms of like I don't know if you have an expectation again around like, oh, I really thought this would be a trip in which we saw XYZ. It's like, that's fine. But if that other person doesn't have that expectation, then you have to kind of be willing to let certain things go. And I only say this again, if you're listening to this, you probably know all this already, but we have friends who have never traveled together. And when they do, they're like, this was an eye-opening experience. I will never travel with either that friend or my romantic partner or a parent or a child, an adult child specifically, or
I'm just going to abandon your 2-year-old.
yeah, well, this guy's just screaming the entire time. I think somebody else might want to take care of this kid. Because I think sometimes people that travel with their adult children and they're like, it was not as fun as I thought it would be. And no, so I think it's one of those things that it is a totally separate event from, anything else, it seems like. So, no, there's a lot to get used to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, honestly, that is it. That's a kind of a nice place to end it on a really high note of don't break up with your friend, partner,
Or parent.
etc., sibling on your trip to Italy. Have a blast. Have a lot of fun. Be clear. And, I guess like the last thing I did want to say is even if you're traveling by yourself, be super clear with your expectations to yourself too. I say that because, again, this is kind of gets more on an emotional, psychological level, but there's a lot of pressure on any solo trip, I think, to like be the best trip, and you're going to learn so much about yourself.
Like,
And,
self-discovery.
yeah.
And yeah.
And it's so, and I only say that because, again, this all my personal experience from traveling solo is I put a lot on myself. Other people put a lot on me in terms of like this, this trip is going to be and it was just so heavy. And it felt like I had to live up to that every day, even on days where I'm like, all I wanted to do is like, read a book in a park. But I'm like, I can't because I'm in Paris, or I'm in this and there, I'm that. I have to go and explore. I have to go do something. I have to meet people. I have to get all sorts of adventures to have. And it's like, but I'm exhausted. I've been surrounded by another language. I just want something familiar. And so, if you're traveling by yourself, and I know a lot of you, not a lot of you, but some of you listening are probably solo travelers or planning on a solo trip. It is important to be clear with your own expectations of what you want out of the trip. It could just be some time away from where you live. It could be you do want to further a sort of self-developmental, self-understanding thing. It could just be nobody wants to come on the trip with you, so you're going by yourself. Who knows? But I think if you get really clear on what you want out of the trip, it'll be so much better. And it's also if you're clear on what you're willing to do and not willing to do, again, in terms of waiting in a line or this and that, the other thing, because there's a lot of indecision that can kill a lot of your time in terms of, I'm okay waiting an hour in line, but not 2.5 hours. And then if you get to a line and it looks huge and it's not moving, it's like, okay, be okay cutting it there rather than waiting in that line anyway, kind of thing. I don't know. There's a lot of that sort of just, it's okay if you set expectations, and especially by yourself, if you want to change them along the trip. And as you're mentioning with a partner, constantly communicate your expectations. It's the same thing with yourself. I think you should constantly communicate with yourself what your expectations are, what's changing, what you need, what you don't need. And
I think you can also, whether you're traveling alone or with a partner or anybody, you can, what's the word? Be your own worst enemy with certain situations. Like if you're in a line and you really want to see the Mona Lisa or the David or whoever it is, and the line is 2 hours and you're thinking, oh, what if I'm missing out on something else amazing while I'm waiting in line? But then you go home having not seen the thing that you went there.
Yeah, exactly. You get out of line to go do something else.
So be really honest with yourself about what you want to do, and don't argue with yourself. Stick to your guns, you know. If you want to see that thing, go see that thing. Spend the time going to see the thing. If you don't want to, and you want to sit in a park and read a book, and you don't really want to see the David, don't let that little voice in your head say, yeah, but you're missing out on culture.
Yeah. I can't believe you went to Florence and didn't see the David or whatever.
If that's what you want to do, it's what you're doing.
Yeah. So that's a big one, especially because I think everybody's trip is going to be different, and yours can be amazing even if you don't see the David, the Mona Lisa, the Uffizi, the Colosseum, whatever it is. It's like it doesn't necessarily matter. You can have an amazing experience in a random strange neighborhood somewhere. And that could be a better experience than having seen like the Colosseum, for example. So with that being said, I think that is the end now.
I think that was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that it's helpful to everybody listening. We hope that it does give you some guidance. We are probably, like, as we not come up with more of these, but as we realize more of these, I think is a better way of putting it, we'll probably be more clear on them, or not more clear, but add to them. But we just wanted to kind of throw them out there in between talking about our trips, which was the Venice trip. We're going to talk about Florence. And then as we move south, we're going to be talking, probably kind of bringing some of these back up. But this kind of does serve as a bit of a groundwork, if you will, for as we get back into talking about different cities, especially because we're in March now, and you're probably planning your trips pretty soon in terms of if you are coming this summer, or if you're coming the fall. And I think actually, if I may, I know I keep saying in the last one, and we'll talk about this more at length at some other point, but there is no off season anymore really for Italy. There's a slower season, and there is the height of the season. But I think that a lot of like travel blogs and talk about, like, if you go in the off season for Italy, it's beautiful. You have the whole city to yourself. You don't. That
doesn't happen anymore.
It doesn't happen anymore. It's slammed. It was slammed in Florence, and there's nothing going on. It was slammed in Rome when we left, when it was just, it was going into the Christmas season, which kind of made sense, but it wasn't specifically anything happening then. It's slammed. It's always slammed. It's going to be slammed. It's just unfortunate that, like, when you might, like Americans specifically, you'll have off probably in the summer, but I know that a lot of other people might take the winter off or might take the spring off. So even though it might not be slammed with Americans, it will still be slammed with people from all around the world who want to come and visit. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're trying to plan your trip. It's not to say that it won't be cheaper in the shoulder seasons or the slower seasons. It's so much cheaper in January than it is in July, of course. And it isn't like going to be completely empty of people.
And that's really just for hotels, right?
Yes.
Which can be a massive savings. Could be, a savings of €100 a night. But it's not like museum tickets or restaurants get cheaper
or anything like that. Unfortunately. So I think that's everything.
Okay. So if you want to learn more, obviously you can keep listening to this podcast, and you can go to our website, which is having more articles every week is the goal. So we have lots of new articles. You can check that out at onlyabag.com. And if you want to get in touch with us, if you have any questions or suggestions for episodes or anything like that, you can contact us with our email, which is onlyabagpodcast@gmail.com. You can reach out on Blue Sky, where we are at onlyabag. And we will soon be shutting down our Instagram, but you can still reach us there currently at onlyabagpodcast.
Correct. Yep. That's everything.
Okay.
I think that's, we'll be shutting that one down, but the rest of them will be hopefully living long and prospering. Thank you all so much for listening. We genuinely appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoyed the podcast, you can leave us a review as well on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every review does help. And I think it helps tremendously too that we changed this from an Italian travel podcast to an Italy travel guide or something like that, because it's
all about the algorithm.
It really is all about the algorithm. So if you want to help us defeat the algorithm or something, then you can do so by leaving a review. And thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks for listening. Tanti abbracci.